as is going to be the case with every piece of World Cup content, for those who've been following me for any bit of time, I feel like you've started to get a sense of how I view the world and what my politics may be. If you did click on this video, I know you don't need a disclaimer at the top here, but I do want to keep reiterating some of the things that are going to keep coming up in the comments. Making content is a big part of my job and my jobs, so you will keep seeing it throughout the World Cup. I don't really have the financial luxury to sit on the sidelines for a whole month. So that's why you're going to keep seeing content, but as I keep telling people too, this is a Barcelona related channel, and we do follow FC Barcelona here, so you're going to see updates on the Barcelona players at the World Cup, and I'm hoping to make some Barcelona-themed content that doesn't have anything to do with the World Cup at all. I don't like that the World Cup is in Qatar. I hate that there's corruption in the game that we love so much. But again, it's also a job, and I'm still doing that job. So without further ado though, here is a World Cup preview. This is extensive as you look at that runtime, so buckle in, put me on in the background while you're doing dishes or cleaning up or doing some homework or whatever. Put me on in the background and maybe you'll catch something with your ear that'll spark some interest and you get to tell your friends some fun facts you might learn. So let's get into it. Here's one or more reasons why you can watch every single team at the World Cup from a Barcelona perspective. Starting with Group A and starting with Ecuador, and starting with a tough one here. Barcelona's had just one Ecuadorian player, Quique Severio, who never actually saw the field, even though he got called up to the matchday squad a few seasons ago. But I'm watching Ecuador with a focus on 6 players in particular. Leverkusen's Pierre Nkapi, which does give me the opportunity to mention my first disclaimer. I don't necessarily know how to say all of these names, but again, I'm going to try my best as always. So pronunciations, I don't mind if you correct me down in the comments below. Do that, or hit me up on Twitter, wherever. You can let me know what the proper pronunciation is, and I'll try to get it better next time. Back to the list, it's LAFC's Diego Palacios, formerly linked with Barca B, Jose Cifuentes, who'll likely be moving to Europe after the World Cup, Brighton's young Moises Caicedo, and Jeremy Sarmiento, and Valladolid's Gonzalo Plata, keeping it in Spain. Of this bunch, I don't know who would ever be at Barca. Nkapi and Caicedo, the most likely, but again, pretty unlikely. To the Netherlands, alright, this is a bit easier here. Obviously, Barca sent Frankie de Jong, and controversially, Memphis Depay appears healthy enough to play. Interesting. Aside from former Barca manager Louis van Gaal managing his last football, and he is the oldest manager at the World Cup, former Barca Academy star Xavi Simons and last season's unlikely hero Luuk de Jong are also in the squad. While the club isn't linked to him directly, Jeremy Frimpong from Leverkusen is on the fringes of the squad, and along with Kenneth Taylor of Ajax and Cody Gakpo of PSV, I can't imagine any of them at their current spots, maybe Taylor, at their club in 18 months, and I don't know, those are players that I would put on Barca's radar. For Qatar, they shouldn't be in it. They are making their World Cup debut, so that'll be a thing, but it's not the player's fault, or the manager's, though he did choose to take the job. And that's Felix Sanchez, who was born in Barcelona and worked in the academy as a coach from 1996 to 2006. Yes, working with some of your favorites as they ascended to the first team. He joined the Aspire Academy in 2006 and has been managing in Qatar for their national team since 2013. Other Spain connections, Tarek Salma was a youth player with both Real Sociedad and Deportivo Alaves, and Akram Afif was loaned out by Villarreal for 5 years, starting with Sporting Gijón. And due to a relationship with the Aspire Academy, a number of players have a connection to Cultural Leonesa, so another Spanish football connection, and yes, of course, Xavi did manage there. Senegal, like everybody else, I was pretty bummed to see Sadio Mane pick up that injury, as have so many other important players, so I'll just tell you to watch out for 3 La Liga players. Youssouf Sabaly of Real Betis, Pathé Ciss, and Nicholas Jackson, the 21-year-old winger from Villarreal, who was briefly linked to Barca a few weeks ago. So he's certainly, that being Jackson, the player to watch. We head to Group B and to England, 1966 champions who are trying to be champions again. They're obviously one of the almost favorites, I say, so of course eyes will be on them anyway. But for Barca fans, I think you should watch in particular Declan Rice from West Ham. Barca would never splash the cash on an expensive Englishman when Chelsea would spend $100 million on him, but his approach to a similar position as Busquets' is going to be something to note. Aside from that, like I watched Monaco a few times last season knowing that Tchouaméni was going to Madrid, Culers can do the same thing with Jude Bellingham. For Iran, this was another tough one. Unless somebody can point something out, I didn't find any direct or even almost Kevin Bacon-esque connections to Iran to FC Barcelona. Unless you count former Real Madrid manager Carlos Queiroz, who Culers may remember trying and completely flopping in charge of the Galacticos. He only managed in the 2003-04 season and finished in 4th place, winning only the Spanish Super Cup. This was with Zidane, Brazilian Ronaldo, Luis Figo, and a newly arrived Beckham. Since then, he bounced around the international scene, Portugal, Colombia, and Egypt, and is now in his second stint with Iran after managing them from 2011 to 2019. For the United States, I do have the numbers and the locations of the people that watch and listen. So I can say that there will be a contingent of these viewers who do follow the pod and who will be watching the United States of America. And that's even if it's not for on loan Serginho Dest. While I'll always be looking for the next American at Barca, there are also La Liga connections, including Celta de Vigo's Luca de la Torre and Valencia's Yunus Musa. Musa, by the way, is one of my picks to really break out in this World Cup, and he's a player that I think Barca should go for, if not for all the other teenage midfielders they already have. If he could play the six consistently, I'd be screaming for his signing yesterday. For Wales, the headline will be Gareth Bale, former Real Madrid player, who today would probably get on fire with Culers because of how much Madrid fans turned on him after the golf jokes. But I won't forgive the Copa del Rey Mark Bartra moment, but that's just me. Aside from Bale, this team is pretty England and Wales based, with some exceptions, but nothing that ties into Spain or Barcelona. Instead, a fun fact, one Welsh player has played for Barca, and that was Mark Hughes for the 1986-87 season, where the centre forward played 37 matches and scored 5 goals, but he's a bit more known for his work at Manchester United. Starting Group C with Argentina, well, Noel Molina does play for Atletico Madrid, and I guess that's it. I think that's it for Argentina. Or maybe there's Herman Pezzella from Real Betis, and alright, on to Mexico. But in all seriousness, I don't need a brief view on Argentina at all. He plays for PSG, but Messi has said himself that he will always be Blaugrana. For other Barca purposes, even disregarding La Liga players in Papu Gomez and Gonzalo Montiel of Sevilla, Pezzella and Guido Rodriguez of Real Betis, Molina and Rodrigo de Paul of Atleti, and Geronimo Rulli of Villarreal, I'll be paying close attention to Juan Foyth of Villarreal and Enzo Fernandez of Benfica if he sees the field. Enzo is another 6 to watch, and of course, Foyth is heavily linked to Barcelona at the moment. For Mexico, of course, Barca Athletic manager Rafa Marquez will be watching these games, but him in a Mexico jersey still gives me nightmares, so I'm not going to focus too much on that. There's also former Barca manager Tata Martino, but that was almost 10 years ago, and boy am I getting old. But there is Real Betis' Andres Guardado, speaking of old, and former La Liga players Hector Moreno and Hector Herrera. But I think the two players to watch for Mexico from a Barca perspective are Edson Alvarez, arguably Mexico's best player and Ajax defensive midfielder, and right back Kelvin Alvarez, who at 23 is gearing up for a move to Europe, as an interesting name that somebody brought up in my YouTube comments a few weeks ago. As you're probably catching on, I'm looking at this tournament as a way to understand what's out there for the pivot and defensive midfielder and right back spots. Well, I guess that last rule doesn't really apply to Poland here, because it's all about Robert Lewandowski. He's the only Polish player ever to play for Barcelona, and I'll be watching any Poland game saying, hey, don't get hurt, score some goals, on to the next one. For Saudi Arabia, I think I do have to take my first L here. I don't really have a reason for a Barca fan to watch Saudi Arabia. Unless you were really interested about the deal in 2018 between the Saudi Arabian Football Federation and La Liga, when Salem Al-Dosari joined Villarreal on loan and made one appearance, actually coming on against Real Madrid as a substitute in a 2-2 come-from-behind draw. Still probably not a good enough reason for me to watch, though. For Group D in Australia, there aren't many connections between Australia and Barcelona. There never has been an Aussie to play for the Blaugrana. La Liga, however, is represented by Cadiz's Our Mobile, and Newcastle has already signed Australia's young player to watch, 18-year-old Garang Kual. For Denmark, things get a bit easier. Of course, Barcelona is represented by Andres Christensen, but there's also Martin Braithwaite, who I think Culers need a bit more time to forgive. Christian Eriksen is obviously the big story, and Sevilla's Thomas Delaney and Kasper Dolberg will be there. Plus, long-term La Liga workhorse in Daniel Vaz is still around. On the theme of pivots and right-backs, Benfica's Alexander Ba at right-back could have a breakout tournament, if he plays. Either way, Denmark has been building something for a while, and we saw some of it with their Euros finish. For France, it's one of those extremes. There's a bit too many reasons for Culers to watch France. Of course, there's Dembélé and Koundé, and hate watching Benzema, Camavinga, and Tchouaméni. But there's also Griezmann, and recently linked Benjamin Pavard. Then it's the usual faces: Lloris, Mbappe, Giroud, Coman, and the Hernandez brothers, and Marcus Thuram. If you're still watching, I don't have anything new to tell you about France. Oh wait, did someone say defensive midfielder? Youssouf Fofana of Monaco is 23, not as good as Tchouaméni and a bit more box-to-box, but hey, I'm still bringing it up because that was going to be my focus here. Tunisia, just like some of the other examples, have never had a player play for Barcelona, suit up for both the country and for the club, and instead of getting into a long discussion about colonialism, many top-level Tunisian players do land in France. With this group, it's actually a bit all over, and I pretty much came up empty. The one thing I did find is that Birmingham City's Anibal Mejbri, on loan from Manchester United, was scouted by Barca in 2019 while he was in Monaco's youth academy. But the 19-year-old, then 16-year-old, was reportedly scouted by all of Man U, Man City, Liverpool, Arsenal, PSG, and Bayern Munich, so pretty much everybody. And that is generally the case with most top prospects who spent time in the prestigious Clairefontaine Academy. Halfway through and shifting gears to Costa Rica, there is more hate watching that may be required for Costa Rica, with Real Madrid's old goalkeeper, Keylor Navas, still doing his thing, though Madrid didn't treat him with much respect on the way out. And former Espanyol defender Oscar Duarte is still protecting him. Due to the Spanish language connections, there are a few other players who used to play in Spain, with only Lugo's Patrick Sequeira, a backup goalkeeper, still on the Iberian Peninsula. But here's your impossible trivia for the day. Barca has only had one player from Costa Rica play for the first team, and that was Alejandro Morera, who played 32 reported matches and scored 15 goals between 1933 and 1935, a difficult time for Barcelona if you know your history. For Germany, again, I get a little break in my research. Obviously, there's Marc-Andre ter Stegen, who'll be backing up Manuel Neuer, Blah, and Rudiger as the other La Liga player. But for Barca purposes, I'm watching for 18-year-old Youssoufa Moukoko and the few minutes he may get. People will say Gundogan from Man City, but he's 32, and I'm not too interested in signing up for that. Moukoko is 18, but with him out of contract at the end of the year for Dortmund and potentially looking for big money, the links with him and Barca may be just that. Links to spark other interest and create a bidding war. Moukoko is also the youngest player of the tournament, by the way. For Japan, I think any Barca connection begins and ends with Real Sociedad's current player, Takefusa Kubo, former Barca Academy player and Real Madrid player who did go out on loan a ton of times. He's still just 21, and while I don't see him rejoining Barca in the future, it's crazy to think how much time he has left to take that next step that both Barca and Madrid believed in. For Spain, I don't even think I need to do the other three in this group because you'll probably be watching these group games because Spain is in them. And I won't waste too much time here either. It's all about those big questions. Is Eric Garcia going to be good for Spain like he usually is and isn't for Barca? Is Busquets going to struggle at the international level the way he has for Barca this season? Can Ferran Torres and Ansu Fati recapture what they've been missing at Barca? What happens if Jordi Alba is vintage Jordi Alba? Will everyone please not kick and injure Pedri and Gavi? These are all questions I'll be pondering watching Luis Enrique play a very similar style to Xavi using a number of Barca players. Group F, it's time for Belgium. Well, yeah, they have Courtois, bleh. Axel Witsel from Atleti will be there, as will someone that looks like Eden Hazard. But with the recent links to Yuri Tielemans, who at 25 could play a major role for Belgium, that's the player I'm watching. 20-year-old winger Jeremy Doku is also a candidate to really break out in this tournament. It's all the faces we've grown to know with the team that I have no idea how they'll do in this tournament. With Canada, because Balotelli just didn't ascend to that next level, and he also never featured for the Barca first team, Barca is still waiting on the first Canadian. And while I don't know if that future first Barca Canadian is in this squad, Daniel Alphonso Davies, I'll be watching Lille's Jonathan David, who is still just 22 and ready for another move, and 20-year-old Ismail Kone. Canada is full of good professionals just below the top club level, but Kone to me is one of those MLS kids I've gotten to watch who I wonder how high he can fly. For Croatia, there is no Ivan Rakitic. Remember, he retired back in September of 2020, so I don't really have a good reason for you to watch Croatia, other than them being a dark horse candidate to win it. Lovro Majer from Rennes, a 24-year-old midfielder, was linked to Barca a few weeks ago, but I don't think that rumor held much water. Ante Budimir has been a menace around the Liga for a few seasons now, and Luka Modric is still there, so there you go. Rounding out Group F is Morocco, who really have one reason for Barca fans to watch, and that is Ez Abde, to wonder if he can ascend and take that next level and have a breakout tournament. He is currently on loan at Osasuna, as I'll remind you. As I said, the big reason to watch Morocco. There is also Sevilla's Youssef En-Nesyri and Yassine Bano, and Valladolid's Jawad El Yamik, and Morocco's success could come into hands of some players that I know people will say Barca should have signed, including Achraf Hakimi and Nassar Mazraoui at PSG and Bayern Munich respectively. On to Group G we go, and that means it's on to Brazil, another team where I got to be a little light on the research, didn't really have to dig in, and I also don't have too much to say. Rafinha is the only Barca connection this time around, with Manchester United, Real Madrid, Liverpool, Arsenal, and PSG all having more representatives. And there's of course former Barca player Neymar, if you remember him. And Dani Alves still got the invite at the ripe old age of 39. Pretty much everybody on this team that will have one already has an expensive home, so Rafinha finding his form is the only individual player I'll be concerned with. The Yoga Bonita of Brazil at the World Cup and being the favorite is also reason enough to watch. For Cameroon, people will mention Samuel Eto'o, but Barca has had 4 players from the African country play for the first team. Alex Song's comments about the paycheck sum up his time, and Jean-Marie Dongu and Wilfred Kaptoum both made 3 appearances and are still hanging on as professionals elsewhere. However, none of them are in this Cameroon team, so I'm going to tell you to watch Nuhu Tolo from the Seattle Sounders. For those that don't watch MLS, I can tell you that things happen with that guy, good and bad, and the variance of his play could lead to a viral moment. Former Barca Academy keeper Andre Anano is starting in net, but after seeing him with Inter, I'm good on him for a while. And while I doubt he'll feature much, Martin Anglet did make 6 appearances on loan for Barca B back in 2018, and since we're in Group G, you can tell I'm trying to use up all my fun facts. Serbia is another team where you'd think that with their footballing history there would be some kind of Barca connections, but alas, the days of Dragan Siric, who made 40 appearances for Barca between 1997 and 2000, are long gone. There are 6 La Liga players in the Serbian ranks, but I think most of the eyes will be on Sergej Milinkovic-Savic, who is now a 27-year-old midfielder after being an up-and-coming star for so many years, with a caveat of watching him being that he was born in Lleida, because his father was playing professionally in Catalonia at the time. For the same reason, Sergej's brother Vanja, who was a goalkeeper in the squad, was born in Llorenç in the Galicia region. With Switzerland, maybe the only reason for Culers to watch may be only for the history buffs. The last Swiss player to play for FC Barcelona was Ernst Thälmann in 1910. The other 2 were George Meyer and a guy by the name of Juan Gamper, or Hans Max Gamper Hessig, as he was born in Switzerland. If there is another Barca player coming from Switzerland, I'm not sure if it's coming from this group, because the core of this team is already pretty established players elsewhere, and I'm not sure how high the ceiling is for the young players. In the Liga, Unai Kamer of Valencia is 24, and pretty much at that level, but who knows if he can't take another step forward at the World Cup, and that's if he plays. Starting our final group, it's Ghana, and it's actually a pretty easy one too. There was only one choice in this squad. It's Inaki Williams, of course, of Athletic Club, who could potentially meet his younger brother Nico, who is playing for Spain. He's only made 2 appearances for them this far, but I'd expect him to start and do his best a Samoa Gyan impression. As much as I said it was just Williams though, Mohamed Kudus, the attacking midfielder from Ajax, Kamaldeen Soleimana, the winger from Rennes, and Tariq Lamptey from Brighton are 3 other players whose stock could skyrocket depending on how the tournament goes. For Portugal, I don't need to tell you why. Of course, I'm going to be doing that meme with the popcorn because of all the Cristiano Ronaldo stuff. But for Barca purposes, the force of Diogo Dalot, Bernardo Silva, João Felix, and Ruben Neves, 4 players that are all unlikely to ever play for Barca, but are also constantly linked with Barca since the season started. Aside from them, João Cancelo is probably the best right back in football, and Rafael Leao could make himself very, very expensive if someone wants to take him from AC Milan. In the case of South Korea, it comes down to watching 2 names above all the rest. It's Park Sung-ho and Lee Kang-in. Lee Sung-woo, who is the most famous Korean name from the academy, didn't get a call this time around, but after a long and winding road through Spain and Germany, Park Sung-ho, the other Korean player affected by the ban those years ago, is back playing in South Korea, and I'm really curious to see where he is at now, having not seen him play in 7 years. Lee Kang-in is now at Mallorca after being a rising star at Valencia, and at still just 21, he won't be at Mallorca for long if things go well at the tournament. And last but not least, Uruguay. Well, I think there are some reasons to watch, and my main reason, though, is of course about Ron Araujo, a player that may not necessarily feature early on in this tournament. Uruguay is a dark horse who could potentially win this World Cup, but I think Ron Araujo is going to have to play a part if they're to do so. Obviously, I'll be watching the exploits of Luis Suarez, Edinson Cavani, and Diego Godin and company, and Fede Valverde is going to be frustratingly good, but Araujo's health is all that really concerns me watching Uruguay. I know I've mentioned a bunch of MLS players already, but watch Facundo Torres too. He's 22 and could potentially have an impact moment at the tournament coming off the bench. Then when he's playing in the Premier League, you won't have to argue with me if he's any good. So if you made it all the way through, give yourself a pat on the back, and thank you so much for having all that, well, at least my kind of fun with me. As this always reminds me, the World Cup actually began as an amateur competition, and it's always a bummer when we're really just talking about not the things that are that global celebration of the beautiful game, but of course all the corruption and all the stuff that goes on when big money is involved. And, that just stinks when you're going throughout this process and trying to do this kind of research. So I don't know how many of you possibly watch this entire thing, maybe just because you like watching my content. But if, you watched all this and you're not planning on watching the World Cup, I hope you do well. If you are watching the games, well, we'll have some stuff to talk about in the coming weeks, of course. And as always, until next time, either way, Forza Barca.